Hey English 1102 friends, this is a short video guiding you through the story Navigators by Mike McGinnis, which is in the Intoxication and Play section of our module of our course. I'm going to take you through this story as efficiently as I can. This is a story from 2011, so it's not that old. Mike McGinnis is still alive and still writing. You can see him right there. He is most famous for this story and for a novel of his called Fat Man and Little Boy, which came out a few years ago. And you can see, if you like this story or wanted to ask him a question about it, you can email him there. Like I said, he is still alive and still writing. He looks like he lives in Iowa now, teaches at Iowa State. Let's jump over to the story. This is a story about a father and a son playing a video game together. One of the important things about the story is that the mom has left in the story. There's a bunch of the main character in the video game they're playing is a woman, and there's a bunch of connections between the missing mom and the female main character in the video game. The story also connects to an old video game from the 80s called Metroid, where the big reveal at the end of the game is that the main character is a woman, so there's a little bit of connection there too. This story is very clearly set in like the 80s or the 90s because there's still blockbusters and stuff like that. They're renting videos. So this story is set in that like old school 80s, 90s video game time period. The other thing that's useful to think about, and the main thing I'm going to focus on as we go through this story, is there's a bunch of connections between the real life that is happening to these characters, the situations they're dealing with in real life, and the situations in the video game. Like the video game character gets dirty, they're dirty, there's this overall idea that the video game character is getting weaker and weaker and weaker. She's losing her weapons, she's having to crouch down, and they're getting sort of weaker and weaker and weaker, like their power gets shut off and they have to move to a smaller apartment and they don't have enough money and these kinds of issues. They're eating this bad food. So there's a bunch of connections to be seen between what's happening in video game world and what's happening in the real world. And the story sets that up right from the very beginning. You can see it sets all those connections up right from the very beginning. You see the dad has put this big paper map up on the wall. The paper was hung in 3 rows, each printed with thousands of small gray squares. It's time we start a map, his father had said, or we'll never finish the game. In games where it was so often easy to lose perspective, but also in life. When Joshua played their game, it was his father's job to keep watch. When Joshua's father had the controller, these were Joshua's job. Their game was Legend of Silence. There you go, you find out. The goal of the game was to lose everything, and that's part of what's happening in this story, is they're losing things and like I said, getting weaker. Let's see if we can... see if we can find the section where the paper is hung over the mom's pictures. It's right here in the beginning. It's right here at the beginning. Unfurled and pinned on the wall where his mother's family's pictures had been, it stood 6 feet high by 7 feet wide. And so the map of the game has taken over the place where the mom used to have their family pictures. And so you're very clearly getting this idea that the game has sort of taken over and filled in this empty space where the mom used to be. They're trying to fill in this absence, this thing that's missing in their life. They're trying to fill it in with this video game. And they're trying to share the job of navigating. The kicker to this game is that instead of getting stronger as you go, like in most quest sort of video games or adventure video games, the main character in this video game gets weaker and weaker and weaker. And he explains it right here at the beginning of the story. The manual still called them power-ups, but this was, his father and son agreed, misleading. They should be called power-downs or nerfs or torments, because this is what they did. The goal of the game was to lose everything so that they could enter nirvana. If you don't know nirvana, it's a religious idea where in the afterlife you don't go to heaven or hell or someplace like that. You go to nirvana, where you you just totally blank out. You lose everything. There is no, you lose your sense of self and sort of go back into the oceanic oneness of the universe, almost like you're a raindrop for a little while and then you sort of fall into the ocean and join the ocean again. Or like when you're alive, you're a wave and then the wave breaks and you just go back into the big body of water. You enter into this sort of nirvana. And the story really sort of explains that at the end when they win the game, winning the game means nothingness. You go back to nothingness, which they obviously can't do. The father and the son can't do that because they still have to live and go through the world. In the first section of this game on page 98, page 99, it takes you through the beginning of the game and how you can't go back to the start. You can't go back to where you started. The real meat of the story, it jumps into this. You always started outside the throne room, where no matter how much farther you explored, the hall outside was like a decayed palace hung with rotting standards, walls collapsing. You get a bunch of imagery here of the video game world where things are rotting and decayed, but it very clearly mirrors their existence, where they're like having their power shut off and having to eat, cooked grilled cheeses with the microwave. And there's just dirty food and old milk stains and stuff like that as you read and go through the story. You can see even right here, the next little section. Tuesday nights were grilled cheese, but when Joshua came home, the gas was off. Again, it's this like things are decaying, things are falling apart, things are rotting, both in the video game world and in their real life. Things are getting more difficult. You can see right here, now each journey through the hallway became more difficult as the heroine withered. It served as an index of her progress. And that idea of progress, well, their progress both in the game and in real life is this sort of decaying and declining. You see right here at the end of that little section, the electric bill was paid through Friday. They could still play their game. Joshua's father changed into his home pants. And so it's like they've let the gas get turned off, but the power's still on, so they can still play their game. You get more of the mom stuff in this next section. Her name was Alicia. That's the main character in the game. That was, in Joshua's opinion, the second most beautiful name in the world. The first most beautiful name was Trudy. The assumption is that that's the mom's name, the mom who's missing. Then third was his own name. Then his father's Dustin. You get a bunch of imagery on page 100 in this next section about the main character having wings at first, and then one of the first things that happens is she gets weaker as she loses the wings. They atrophy. And at the end of that, then father and son understood the game. Joshua's father said, this is a real game. And the dad's connection to it, the dad's understanding of it is, this is how life works too, because you get weaker and things get harder and more difficult as you go through life, is what the dad is getting at right here. You can also kind of trace the different little weapons and devices they get in the game. They get these boots, then they get the elixir of ice, which slows the main character down. Then they have to break their sword right here at the top of page 101. And then the story jumps back to their real life. They tried to cook together. They made meatloaf with 7327 beef and great value saltines. They made stir fry with bits of eggs. They made macaroni casserole. They made pizza bagels. All this sort of cheap, easy to make, and mostly not good for you kinds of food. And the suggestion in the story is that they're sort of like getting by as best they can. The dad can't really cook. They're just sort of struggling to get by. And then in the video game, it jumps back to the video game, and in the video game, they're trying to find dirt. This section, there's a bunch of really obvious connections. There's the bad food, and them thinking about eating dirt, and then they actually find the dirt in the video game on page 102. And when they actually find the dirt, she doesn't eat it. The character smears it all over herself in the video game, and then right after that, Joshua examined their clothes. His father's, his own, both were crusted with cheese puff dust and stained with cranberry juice cocktail. It had been nearly a month since they'd done the laundry. This is maybe the most obvious moment in the story where it's making this connection between their real life and video game life. You see her getting dirty in the video game, and then the son looks around and they're dirty too. And it's obvious what the story is trying to do is make all these connections. At the end of that section, at the top of page 103, is where the dad tells them they have to move to a smaller apartment. They have to go from a 2-bedroom apartment to a 1-bedroom apartment so that Joshua, the kid, has to sleep in the living room. And then, interrupting the move, is they found the oozing earplugs, and it messes up their hearing. The music was no music. Joshua fired the gun. The shots did not burble as they used to. And so you get another device that they find in the game that weakens her, that makes things worse than they were before. That takes you to... you also get this really vivid image when they move into the new apartment. They have to take their paper map and stick it onto they have a sliding glass door in their living room, and they stick the map to the sliding glass door, and you get this really vivid image. They plugged in their game as the sun set. It shone brightly through the map, so you get the sunset coming through the map that they've stuck to the big glass door, casting a grid over the kitchen and their faces, and in that grid a brighter bruise or a fog like melted crayons. Joshua's father was blue and yellow in the face from water, poisonous acid. Joshua's hands were green and brown from the plant zone. The throne room was cast on the refrigerator side. This is another really clear image where it's almost like the game or the map of the game is on top of them, and it's this very clear connection between what's going on in their life and what's going on in the game, because the map, they're sort of, it almost makes them live inside the game because the map is on top of them. And that jumps you back into their real world and out of the game again in the story. It's right after that they find this cork that they have to plug into their gun, another device. And then right after that, they find this belt, this lead belt that she has to put on. I found the lead belt. You see, it was a narrow band of pixels, so that the character, not only has she lost her wings, but she can't stand up anymore. She's getting weaker and slower and losing all of her weapons, just like they have lost. The gas got cut off and they've had to move to a smaller apartment. She's losing weapon, tools, and devices and things like that. And the dad even says, maybe we can't win. That's life too, I guess. But they end up just sort of crawling around wearing the belt. They have to eat worse and worse food here at the bottom of page 105. Father and son experimented with a mostly vegetarian diet, and it turned out having money to play with meant paying the utilities on time. Peanut butter and jellies were the same, and so were chips, but no hamburgers, no fish sticks. So again, they're getting weaker and weaker. Their situation is getting worse and worse. Until you jump down right here to page 106, the last page and a half of the story. You get this other very vivid image where the dad is calling his relatives and talking to them. And Joshua is able to pick up enough that the mom lives in Atlanta. Atlanta was the capital of Georgia. It was a big city. This was not nearly enough. Joshua couldn't even find his own way through Legend of Silence. Again, you get this idea of like trying to navigate, and he's wishing for his mom and wishing he could find his mom. But he knows he can't find her. He can't even find his way through the video game. Again, this connection between like real world geography and trying to map your way through the game. And then finally, you get to the end of the game. They win the game, or they complete the game. And at the end, what happens at the end of the game, like I said, is this: the screen goes blank. Let's see if we can find that. He would use the black Sharpie. The screen was black now, so everything just blacks out. The screen's just black. A white blinking cursor at the screen center is in a word processor. After a moment's hesitation, it made blocky white text on the screen. And the game starts asking them questions. You are in Nirvana. You are not in Nirvana. You've come here to destroy your enemy. And they have to answer yes or no. Your enemy is not in Nirvana, and neither are you. There is no you. You might pursue your enemy, yes or no. And the game asks them this series of questions till finally you get to the conclusion. The weight falls from your body falls from your soul falls from your absence. This is in the religious notion of nirvana. This is what finally happens when you achieve nirvana. There's no you anymore. There's no wanting. There's no desire. Your body falls away. Your soul falls away, and you just sort of join the universal oneness. However, there's this break between game world and real world. Do you fear? Yes or no? Are we afraid? Yes, said Joshua. You will forget fear. Do you love? Yes, said his father, you will forget love. Congratulations, you win. Well, obviously, they can't forget fear or love. They're still trying to live day to day, sort of hand to mouth. Like in the game, you get to nirvana at the end of the game. They are clearly not in nirvana. They are just struggling to get by and struggling to survive. His father squeezed him tight. Josh wondered what they would do now. And that wondered what they do now has this double meaning of, well, now that they don't have the game to play, what next? What will they do next? You know, like what will they do with their free time, with their spare time, this thing that they've done together. But there's also this, what would they do now? Like, how are they going to hang on? How are they going to be able to survive living this way, especially if things get worse? The need he felt was like when he stepped on a sliver of glass and his mother pulled at the skin with her tweezers. If you notice, it's the mom, and he's missing his mom. Because she's gone. It was like when she told him to get ready, to squeeze his father's hand, clenching his teeth, closing his eyes, waiting. Well, waiting for what? For things to get even worse? Because all signs point to they're not getting any better, at least in the story. You know, like I said, they're just sort of struggling to get by. And so at the end of the game ends with this sort of, oh, you're in nirvana, you don't want anything or need anything anymore. But clearly at the end, that's not the situation for the father and son. They're still wanting and fearing and needing things and needing help. So that's what you get with Navigators. On the surface level, it's this sort of nice story about a dad and his son playing a game together and them sort of enjoying it together. But underneath that, there's this very clear idea of how the suffering and the struggling in the game connects to and mirrors their suffering and struggling in real life until you get to the end and you get nirvana in the game. But like I said, they're clearly not in nirvana and they're still wanting and needing things in real life. I hope that helps you understand Navigators and think about Navigators, especially those points where it's really obvious the connections between real life and the game world. If you have questions about Navigators or Mike McGinnis or anything like that, just be in touch with me. Otherwise, thanks.